Hello and welcome to the video. This is an overview and review of this thing here. This is the Holystone HS720E. This is the version with a 4K camera that has electronic image stabilization on it as well. Now this is a little bit different from a lot of the things that I've looked at on the channel, but quite a few of you have been in touch and asked me to look at this kind of class of drone. And I will use the drone word with this. I'm not a fan of the word drone because it has lots of negative connotations in the wider hobby. And typically when I want to fly around and I want to film something, then I will use a regular quadcopter running Betaflight or iNav, or sometimes Arducopter, and I'll stick an action camera on the top and then use an action camera that has some kind of image stabilization in. For those of you that watch the channel, you know that I'm a big fan of things like the SMO 4K camera and things like the Peanut camera, because those allow you to record and fly around, but actually the image is stabilized in post and gives you a lovely smooth image that's a pleasure to look at. So I'm interested in this because this isn't cheap by any stretch of the imagination. It's not a million miles away from the kind of cost of the DJI systems, but I'm fascinated to see how easy is this to actually get out the box and get set up and go and fly, and also what is the quality of the video as well. Now this model works in the same way that lots of other versions of these things do. There's lots of competition for this part of the market for these kind of flying camera drones. This one works in a very similar way in that it's a Wi-Fi connection with your phone or tablet, and that's popped on the top of the radio, and that is where you can look at the image that's coming down from the camera. On that same screen, you can also do things like change the settings and how it all works. And then you have the standard controls on the main radio that sits underneath your phone that give you access to all of the standard stuff: throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder, and then also has a couple of other buttons, something to angle the camera up or down, because you can look pretty much straight out or down on this particular model, and also do things like arm and disarm, and do things like automatic takeoff and initiate the return to home, as well as switch between kind of high speed and low speed modes. So let me show you how it comes in the box, talk about the specs, and go through some of the setup tips, because I got caught out with something with this, and I'm guessing that's because I'm coming from my side of the hobby, which is more around Betaflight and iNav quads for things like this. So again, this is the Holystone HS720E drone. Weight of the drone is about 495 grams. The size, when it's all folded up, it's really nice and compact. It goes down to about 180 by 104 by about 60 millimeters, and the arms fold out as you saw in the beginning. Flight distance is claimed at 3,277 feet, or a kilometer. I think that's a little ambitious. You might be able to get control, but you will lose video way before that. The FPV distance is only about 500 meters, or about 1,600 feet, and that is going to be in ideal conditions because again it's using Wi-Fi to send the video down to the phone that you're using to view the footage. Now I've had issues with a couple of flights on mine. In some places that I've flown it, it has performed beautifully, and I've had, although the video lags quite a bit, it actually is easy to fly it by kind of keeping your eye on that screen. In other places I've only had 1 or 2 frames a second, which makes it tricky to fly in any kind of FPV way. It comes in this absolutely beautiful bag. The finish on this bag is fabulous. It feels like a really high quality product, and then as you unzip it, then you start to get into all the goodies. You can see here the drone on the left hand side, you have the radio and all the other pieces. Now it's claimed a flight time of this of about 23 minutes. I think that's ambitious. I think realistically you should be looking for 15 to 18 minutes tops, and the charging time for these batteries that I'm going to show you in a minute is very long. It's about 5 hours. So that's the kind of thing that you need to put the batteries on and leave them for 5 hours to soak and charge. Great that you get spare pairs of props in the bag. I've had a couple of mishaps with mine, and so far nothing has been broken. And then there is one battery included that's already in the model. Get a little tool there for taking the split things apart, and you also get a second battery. So between the two of them, you're going to get anywhere between half an hour to about 40 minutes flight time. The two batteries are 2S 2800 mAh batteries, and they are LiPo. The transmitter itself, as you can see here, kind of unfolds so that it's much easier to hold. A sprung throttle, so standard stuff here, and the antennas open at the top. Unfortunately, it is using AA batteries. I guess that's a cost-saving exercise. That's one of the few things that isn't in here that you're going to need to fly: an SD card and two AA batteries. And then you have all the other controls to handle things like arming and disarming, doing the binding process, setting up whether it's high or low speed, starting and stopping, recording, taking photos, taking video, initiating the return to home, having an auto takeoff and auto land as well. Now you can see here that it has an optical flow sensor on the bottom, which helps it maintain position, and you have the standard arms that fold out. The camera itself is on a vibration isolating mount, but it isn't a gimbal as such. It only allows it to tilt through about 90 degrees. Now, to install the battery, you need to remove this little foam pad. It's shipped like this, and I'd recommend you keep that foam pad nice and safe. It stops it kind of clicking home so that the model can't accidentally be powered while it's in the bag. Lens angle of the camera is about 130 degrees. The resolution on the SD card that you need to put in the model is 3840 by 2160p. The resolution on the mobile phone is a lot less, but it will record in 4K 30 frames a second. Now on the website it says the maximum card that's supported is 128 gigabytes, but I think it needs to be FAT32, so I'd recommend using a 32 gigabyte card. In terms of the setup, it's all covered in the manual, and the manual itself is really good. I was quite impressed with this. Not a lot of Chinese English, and it kind of is easy to follow with lots of images, particularly useful for a first-time pilot. So you need to unpack the model and then put the batteries on charge. Again, that's going to take 5 hours. I'd strongly recommend that you never leave a LiPo that's charging unattended. So you're going to have to make sure that you've got maybe a Lord of the Rings marathon or something that you want to watch, so you can do that while it is charging. The charging time for these batteries is one of the weakest parts of this kit. These kind of batteries should be able to be charged in 20 minutes, half an hour, not 5. Once you got the batteries on charge, you can download the application onto your phone, and the other thing you need to do is pop two AA batteries into the transmitter. Now once the drone battery is charged, you can insert it into the model, and then a short press of the power button at the top will power it up. Now I had to go through the buying process in mine. That just means holding the lock button and powering on the receiver and then powering on the drone, and then it all bound up. Surprised that wasn't done from the factory. And then once that's all set up, then you connect to the Wi-Fi access point that the drone creates on your phone, start the application, and you're in business. First time you fly it, there are a couple of things that you need to do. Again, covered in the manual. There's a first time calibration, and also you need to perform a compass calibration where you need to hold the sticks in the bottom right hand side and then turn the model around. And it's a standard kind of dance that you have to do with GPS models like this. I would recommend doing it the first time in a place that's a lower light, because the flashing LEDs on the underside of the arms actually tell you which part of the process that you're in. Once you've done that, then you're ready to fly. So let me talk a little bit about that and put some footage in here. I've had a number of flights, but let me put the footage in that kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. You do need to get to grips with how to initialize, unlock and take off. The big trick is you need to wait for a GPS lock. It'll tell you at the top, and it'll make sure that you can't take off until it's happy and it's got a hard GPS lock. Once it has, then you select the unlock button, which is the red one on the remote, the prop start, and then you can either press the little button in the top left hand corner of the radio, and that will then take it off, and then you are flying and you can fly around. The position hold is very good, even in windier conditions, and particularly at lower level where it can use the optical flow sensor to keep itself in one place. It will sit nice and steadily in the air. The big tip I will give you here is that in the setup on the application, there is something called beginner mode. That will only let you fly about 10 meters away. The first time we ever flew it, that was what it was in. There's nothing in the manual about this. I have reported that back to Holystone that this needs to be talked about. In beginner mode, it only flies a certain distance away, and then it will not respond to your commands, and it kind of just sits there. And it's really confusing if you are a new pilot. You're kind of wondering what the heck is going on. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to figure that out before it landed in the top of a holly bush, but luckily we didn't have any damage, so it was easy to then get the other battery, pop it in, and go and fly. Second footage here, this is from the follow me mode. Now this quadcopter has several different modes that you can select. You can have the standard one where you can fly it around using the sticks on the radio, and you can look at the footage or the view from the camera live-ish using the view on the phone that's connected to the transmitter. Or you can do things like you can select a point of interest, or you can have it set up for follow me mode. And that's the footage that this is here. This is follow me mode. So this is me and a flying buddy of mine called Ross, hello to Ross, out in a field, and we are walking around, and what we've done is we've selected follow me mode, and the phone that's part of the radio is sending up its GPS coordinates, and the drone is then following us about. Now, the only thing I'll comment on here is that this was set to record at 4K. It doesn't feel like a 4K image. It feels more like it's upscaled to 4K, because as you zoom in, you can't really see the detail. And if I show you one of the stills that we took and kind of zoom in, it definitely doesn't feel like a 4K still. So I've got two top tips if you're looking at getting one of these models. The first is turn off beginner mode. That will allow you to fly more than 10 to 15 meters away. I would always recommend, if you are new to this kind of stuff and interested in getting yourself a flying camera like this, then have your first flights well away from buildings and stuff. It is very tempting to take it out into your back garden and just try and hover it. But unfortunately, as you've seen from some of the footage, if you get to the edge of range and then you happen to be over somebody's car or over a drop or whatever, and you then struggle to get it back and you start panicking, you're going to get into trouble. I would recommend for your first couple of flights, while you get into grips with this, go somewhere that is open, where there's no obstacles, because the issue with this is that it doesn't have any kind of obstacle avoidance on it at all. So in that follow me footage, we're having to be very careful not to walk too quickly and walk behind trees that are higher than the drone, because the drone will just fly into them and potentially we'll never get it back until we find a really long ladder. The other thing as well is that you will need a FAT32 formatted SD card. I've been using the 32 gig one here, and the file sizes allow for quite a few flights before the card starts to get full. I like the fact that you get pretty much everything in the box except the two AA batteries and your SD card. Setup is pretty simple with the manual, and it is easy to follow. So props to Holystone for making it nice and easy and not having to plug it into a computer to activate anything. The only issue is the fact that there is that beginner mode that isn't talked about in the manual. The GPS and optical flow sensors are helpful, and they seem to work very well, but do make sure that you do the compass calibration regularly. It does talk about that in the manual. Personally, I've only done it a handful of times, and it's kind of worked great. The return to home mode is set so it returns when the battery is low, which is great, and the endurance is okay. This is a great example of the kind of flight times that you can get with a relatively small battery. It's claimed at 23 minutes per battery, but you do get the two in the box, but I'd reckon more like 15 or 18 minutes. There are the low and high speed settings, and also things like follow me and point of interest modes, but of course you need the phone to use those to set that up. And the performance in the wind is good with decent position hold. The video performance is okay as well. The image is saved as an MP4, but to me, I don't think it looks like a 4K. I don't know whether that's part of the electronic image stabilization. It's smudging it a little bit, but the image stabilization isn't flawless. The camera isn't on a gimbal, so it means that you don't get super smooth video, which was what I was hoping for. Flying isn't flying as I know it, but for a relative newcomer to handle with a default setup, you would be able to get to grips with this so long as you took your time, got a bit of practice in something like an open field where there wasn't anything to fly into. Number of things I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of the time it takes to charge the batteries. 5 hours is way too long. I think if they bring out a new version of this, they really need to look charge time for those batteries. There isn't any obstacle avoidance, I've already mentioned, so you can absolutely fly it into stuff, so be aware of that. It's not going to save you if you do something daft. Optical flow at the bottom seems to work very well, but it only works at lower levels, so below a couple of meters is going to be fine. Higher than that is not going to help. The phone holder on the radio doesn't feel super sturdy to me, and I actually managed to turn my phone off the first time I popped it in, because with my particular phone, my Huawei thing, it actually caught the power button, so be aware of that. Also not a fan of the fact that the antennas on the radio are right behind where the phone is put. It would be better to have the phone in a slightly different position, or the antennas in a different position, so that they're not obscured and be interfering with each other. And the claim 500 meters of range with a Wi-Fi connection, I would say that is in ideal conditions. I had issue with low frame rates on a couple of my flights here, so be aware of that. Other thing as well is that I couldn't find, at the time of recording, a crash kit. So this is one of those things that you have to be very careful about. If you smash it up, then it's going to be hard to get replacement parts. In summary, what is here works well, but you need to practice to get the most from it. The lack of any kind of gimbal for the camera does mean that you get quite shaky footage unless you are flying smoothly. But some of the things like the follow me modes are quite fun to play with, but are they Instagram or YouTube ready? I don't think so. I think you'd need some post-production stuff to try and stabilize them a little bit more. So if it's your first camera drone, then my big tip is start simple, get the hang of it, fly in an open area, learn how to fly it around and get it all working, and then once you get comfortable with it, you can start to use it in anger. And the last thing is, crashes with this could be expensive until you find a place to get spares. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organized into easy to follow playlists that, if you're trying to learn a topic, will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.